When you open a Protestant Christian Bible and browse through the table of contents, you'll notice that nearly 3/4 of it is dedicated to the Old Testament. This section consists of 39 distinct books organized into 4 primary categories: the Pentateuch, historical books, poetic writings, and books of the prophets. Although this layout may seem simple at first glance, it carries layers of profound depth and complexity. The format known today as the Old Testament was shaped within Christian tradition after the time of Jesus and the apostles. In earlier Jewish tradition, however, these writings existed as separate scrolls, collectively referred to as the TaNaK. The name TaNaK is derived from Hebrew, representing the initials of its 3 main sections: Torah, Toah, meaning law or instruction; Nevi'im, Nevi'im, meaning prophets; Ketuvim, Ketuvim, meaning writings. While the TaNaK and the Protestant Old Testament contain the same books, their order and grouping differ significantly. Specifically, the Torah corresponds to the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Nevi'im includes not only prophetic books, but also historical narratives that reflect the role of prophets in Israel's history. The Ketuvim features a diverse collection of poetic literature, wisdom writings, and other narrative texts. This 3-part structure has ancient roots and is referenced in historical Jewish texts. Even Jesus acknowledged this division, underscoring how deeply ingrained it was in the organization of sacred scriptures during his time. Far from being isolated works, the scrolls are intricately interconnected through themes, cross-references, and recurring narratives, forming a unified collection. The process of compiling these writings spans centuries. Some authors, like Moses and David, are well known, while many others remain anonymous, often referred to simply as scribes or prophets. Generations of scribes meticulously gathered, edited, and organized stories, poems, laws, and prophecies, shaping what would become the comprehensive TaNaK. Evidence from the Psalms and prophetic books suggests that these scribes believed they were divinely inspired, guided by God's Spirit to faithfully convey his message to future generations. Although the exact timeline of the TaNaK's completion is uncertain, scholars generally agree that it was finalized several centuries before the time of Jesus. The TaNaK is not merely a historical record of Israel. It presents a prophetic interpretation of history, revealing God's overarching plan to redeem humanity and the world. The Torah, the first and foundational section of the TaNaK, opens with a grand narrative: God creating a perfect world filled with beauty, order, and purpose. Humanity is entrusted with the stewardship of this creation, called to manage it with wisdom and care. However, humanity quickly rebels under the deceptive influence of a cunning serpent, leading to a tragic separation from God and exile from the Garden of Eden. As human civilization expands, people begin to redefine good and evil on their own terms. This moral autonomy results in widespread violence, corruption, and the infamous rise of Babylon, a symbol of humanity's desire to assert dominance, even over God. This tension sets the stage for a recurring theme throughout the Bible. While God's intention is to bless the world through humanity, humanity's own failures become the very obstacle to that blessing. God's solution is not to abandon humanity, but to promise the emergence of a new kind of human, one who will ultimately conquer evil and restore what was lost. This promise begins with Abraham and Sarah, who are called to leave Babylon and journey to a land that God pledges to give them. Their story is the genesis of a family through whom God intends to bring redemption to all nations. The narrative follows Abraham's descendants through multiple generations: Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's 12 sons. Yet, instead of being portrayed as flawless heroes, these figures are marked by struggles, deceptions, betrayals, and deep moral failures. Their flaws mirror the brokenness of humanity itself, reinforcing the biblical theme that God's purposes are not fulfilled through human perfection, but through divine faithfulness. Despite the continual failings of Abraham's family, God remains steadfast in his covenant. He promises to bless the world through their lineage, establishing an everlasting relationship with Abraham's descendants. However, this family eventually finds itself enslaved in Egypt, setting the stage for one of the most pivotal figures in the entire Bible: Moses. Moses emerges as a prophet, a priest, and a leader, a central figure who embodies the role of mediator between God and his people. Under God's guidance, Moses confronts Pharaoh, leads the Israelites out of slavery, and brings them to Mount Sinai, where they receive the law. This law, or Torah, is more than a set of rules. It's a comprehensive covenant designed to shape Israel into a nation that reflects God's justice, holiness, and compassion. Yet even Moses and the people he leads fall short. They repeatedly break the covenant, rebel against God, and suffer the consequences of their disobedience. The Torah concludes on a bittersweet note. Moses stands on a mountain, gazing at the promised land, a land he will never enter. Before his death, he delivers a series of speeches, warning Israel of their inevitable failures while holding on to hope for a future intervention by God. Moses speaks prophetically about the coming of another leader, a prophet like himself, who will guide the people with wisdom and righteousness. This expectation bridges the Torah with the next section of the TaNaK, the Nevi'im, or prophets, where the story of Israel's journey continues. Following the Torah, the next section of the TaNaK is the Nevi'im, meaning prophets. This collection is divided into two parts: the former prophets, which recount Israel's historical narrative, and the latter prophets, which focus on prophetic messages addressing Israel's faithfulness, moral failures, and hope for the future. The Nevi'im begins with the book of Joshua, who succeeds Moses as the leader of Israel. Joshua's leadership marks the Israelites' entry into the Promised Land, fulfilling part of God's covenant with Abraham. Under his guidance, Israel experiences military victories and territorial expansion, demonstrating the blessings that come from obedience to God's instructions. However, even in this period of conquest, seeds of future struggles are sown as the people gradually drift away from God's laws. As the narrative progresses into the books of Judges, Samuel, and Kings, a recurring cycle of faithfulness, rebellion, judgment, and restoration emerges. Israel repeatedly turns away from God, worshiping foreign idols and neglecting the covenant. In response, God allows them to face oppression and hardship, yet he continually raises up judges, prophets, and leaders to guide them back to righteousness. Figures like Deborah, Gideon, Samuel, and King David stand out as pivotal leaders, though even their stories are marked by personal flaws and moral failings. One of the central themes of the former prophets is the rise of Israel's monarchy. The people demand a king to rule over them, desiring to be like other nations. God grants their request, anointing Saul as the first king. However, Saul's disobedience leads to his downfall, and he is replaced by David, whose reign becomes the golden standard for Israel's kingship. David is portrayed as a man after God's own heart, yet his life is also marred by sin, including his affair with Bathsheba and the subsequent murder of her husband. Despite David's failures, God makes a profound covenant with him, promising that one of his descendants will reign forever, a messianic hope that echoes throughout the rest of the TaNaK. This promise continues through David's son, Solomon, who builds the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. Under Solomon's reign, Israel reaches its peak of wealth and influence. But his later years are marked by idolatry and political compromise, leading to the eventual division of the kingdom into Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. The latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets, shift the focus from historical narrative to prophetic warnings and messages of hope. These prophets speak during times of national crisis, including foreign invasions, exile, and the destruction of Jerusalem. Their writings are filled with calls for repentance, justice, and faithfulness to God's covenant. They denounce corruption, idolatry, and social injustice, emphasizing that true worship goes beyond rituals and requires a heart aligned with God's will. Yet, amid these harsh warnings, the prophets also offer profound hope. They speak of a future restoration, a new covenant, and the coming of a righteous king, a descendant of David, who will establish an everlasting kingdom of peace and justice. Isaiah, in particular, provides vivid imagery of this hope, describing a suffering servant who will bear the sins of many, bringing redemption not just to Israel, but to all nations. The Nevi'im concludes with a sense of anticipation. The people of Israel are in exile, scattered among the nations, but the prophetic voices urge them to look forward to God's ultimate intervention. They predict the arrival of a prophet like Elijah, who will prepare the way for the Lord's return and the renewal of his covenant with his people. The final section of the TaNaK is the Ketuvim, meaning writings. This diverse collection includes poetry, wisdom literature, philosophical reflections, historical accounts, and apocalyptic visions. The Ketuvim doesn't follow a strict chronological order, but instead explores a wide range of human experiences and emotions, providing profound insights into the nature of God, humanity, and the world. The Ketuvim opens with the Psalms, a collection of 150 poems and songs attributed to various authors, including King David. The Psalms express the full spectrum of human emotions: joy, sorrow, gratitude, anger, fear, and hope. They serve as prayers and hymns for both individual and communal worship, offering words of praise, lament, and trust in God's faithfulness. The Psalms often reflect back on the themes of the Torah and the prophets, celebrating God's covenant promises and longing for the fulfillment of his redemption plan. Following the Psalms are the wisdom books, including Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Proverbs presents practical guidance for living wisely and ethically, emphasizing the importance of fearing the Lord as the foundation of wisdom. Ecclesiastes, attributed to Solomon, offers a more philosophical perspective, grappling with the meaning of life, the fleeting nature of worldly pursuits, and the ultimate significance of honoring God amidst life's uncertainties. Job explores the profound question of why the righteous suffer, challenging simplistic views of divine justice and illustrating the mystery of God's sovereignty through the intense personal trials of Job. The Ketuvim also includes shorter narrative books like Ruth, Esther, and Lamentations, each providing unique perspectives on God's providence and human resilience. Ruth is a story of loyalty, redemption, and divine grace woven into the lineage of David, while Esther highlights God's hidden hand at work to save his people from destruction. Lamentations, traditionally attributed to Jeremiah, mourns the fall of Jerusalem, yet even in its grief, it clings to the hope of God's enduring mercy. Another significant book within the Ketuvim is Daniel, which blends historical narrative with apocalyptic visions. Daniel's story of faithfulness in exile and his prophetic dreams reveal God's sovereignty over earthly kingdoms and his plan to establish an eternal kingdom through a divine ruler, often interpreted as the Messiah. The Ketuvim concludes with the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles, which reflect on Israel's history from creation to the return from exile. Chronicles, in particular, revisits many of the same events found in Samuel and Kings, but with a renewed emphasis on the temple, worship, and the hope for a future Davidic king who will restore God's blessings to Israel. Conclusion: the unified story of the TaNaK. The TaNaK is more than a collection of ancient writings. It is a masterfully woven narrative that tells the story of God's covenant with Israel and his plan to redeem all of humanity. Despite being written by numerous authors over centuries, the TaNaK maintains a remarkable unity with recurring themes of creation, fall, covenant, exile, and hope for restoration. Throughout its pages, the TaNaK invites readers to reflect on profound questions. What does it mean to live in relationship with God? How do we respond to suffering and injustice? What is the ultimate purpose of humanity? From the opening chapters of Genesis to the closing words of Chronicles, the TaNaK points toward the hope of a future where God's kingdom will be fully realized, his promises fulfilled, and his presence restored among his people. The TaNaK remains a timeless source of wisdom, faith, and inspiration. Its rich tapestry of law, history, poetry, prophecy, and wisdom literature continues to speak to the hearts of people across generations, inviting them into a deeper understanding of God's character, his covenant, and his unchanging plan for redemption.